What's up, everyone? It's Sam here from Lore Lounge, here today to talk about an incident that I've always found fascinating, but it's pretty difficult to find information on unless you really know where to look and what you're looking for. And today I'm going to talk about one of the only legally justified self-defense shootings I know of that took place in the latter 20th century that was actually carried out using a fully automatic firearm. So this shootout is commonly referred to as the Gary Fadden Incident. Now again, it's pretty hard to find information on this incident, so I don't blame you if you've never heard of it before. I didn't myself until a few years back when something just piqued my interest and I decided to look into these type of shootings more closely. So just a quick caveat before we actually hop into the video. There's not really any media that relates to the incident itself. There's no news reports. There's no pictures even related to the people involved or anything like that. No pictures of the shootout scene or anything of that nature. It's only just a couple of newspaper articles here and there. So instead, I got this pretty sweet early 90s H&K promotional video that shows some of their products and whatnot. So that's just going to be running in the background. Most of the information I'll be giving out today is going to come from an article written by Musad Ayub for the magazine American Handgunner, who actually had the opportunity to interview Gary Fadden at some point. So I'll have a few links down below in the description with what information I could find, and if you have anything to add that I missed, make sure to leave it down there in the comments down below. And while you're down there, there's no harm in hitting that subscribe button, you know what I'm saying? So let's hop right into the story. So this whole incident begins innocently enough on a Sunday, February 24th in 1984 at approximately about 2 p.m. Gary Fadden, who was 26 at the time, and his lovely 22-year-old fiancée were driving from a birthday party in Martinsburg, West Virginia into Virginia to look for some property for what they hope would be a starter home for their marriage. It's a bitterly cold day, and with their winter coats on in the back of a new 1984 Ford F-250 Super Cab, Fadden looks from a distance like a harmless yuppie. Now that means that he and the pretty brunette to his right, they look like prey to another kind of person. So at the same time, heading east on Route 50, they are passed by a Harley-Davidson motorcycle with two people on it, the operator cutting in front of him so sharply that he has to brake suddenly. Now Gary comments to a fiancé how they must be riding a bike in the low 30s that day and it must be really cold, and that driving carelessly as he is, the cyclist needs to worry about sudden patches of ice. But a few minutes later, he spots a Chevy pickup in his rearview mirrors, and it contains three people. One passenger is gesturing for him to pull over, and Gary doesn't know what these scruffy guys want, so he ignores them. But then he sees the passenger waving a knife, and the driver bringing up a revolver. So at this point, Gary says to his fiancée, in what probably be the understatement of his life, "We've got a problem here." So this is 1984, long before the universal coming of cell phones, so there's not really any communications in the vehicle. They're entering Middleburg, which is a town of about 800 people, and they stop at a red light, surprisingly. Behind them, Gary could see both males exit the truck and run towards them. Now, the driver's hand is actually on Gary's door handle when he pops the clutch and just speeds straight through the intersection against the light. The two men run back to their pickup and the chase is on. At this point, the pursuers are almost on his bumper, so Gary accelerates, hitting open road now, reaching about 95 miles an hour, zigging and zagging everywhere. Not only are the pursuers keeping pace, but he sees the driver aiming a revolver at him out of his window. Now honking his horn, flashing his lights, and whenever he runs into clusters of automobiles, he's passing them, sometimes on the shoulder, sometimes on the road, spraying gravel, and he just can't elude the truck behind him. Gary is desperately looking for a police car that he could flag down, but he just can't find one. So the chase is on for about 22 miles now, and they're getting into dense urban areas again. But coming up is an intersection that Gary knows really well, considering he goes through there every day on his way to work. Unfortunately, even on Sunday, it's definitely going to be clogged. He forms a plan quickly. If the light turns in his favor, he'll go through it and keep going, hoping to find a police station or a police officer in a more populated area. If the light is against him, he'll turn right and make it to the plant where he works. So the light stays red, and Gary cuts a hard right, heading for what he hopes will be sanctuary of his workplace. And behind him, he could see that the pursuers have not given up. They're still after him. So he tells his wife, "I've got my pass card to the gates and the front door. We'll get into the building and we could hide. They can't find us in there. We'll just call the cops from inside." He pulls into the front area of the plant, and the automatic gate mechanism is taking a super long time to rise, just achingly slow. And as the gate opens, the pursuing truck comes up behind his. Both men jump out, and they're running towards Gary's Ford. Their hands are clawing at his door handles. He guns the engine away from them, sweeping up to the front door and locking the brakes in his skid. Now, the plant that Gary works at is Heckler & Koch. Gary Fadden is actually a salesman for the firearms manufacturing company H&K, and among the rest of their firearms, he sells machine guns. So in the truck with him was actually a competitor's weapon that he had acquired to test, a Ruger AC-556, the select fire version of the .223 Ruger Mini 14 rifle. He grabs it now, throws open the truck door, hoping to hold him off at gunpoint. But Gary sees his fiancée can't make it to the building's door, so he screams for her to get down on the floor of the truck. At this point, the gunfight's almost on. Now, Gary sees that the passenger has hopped out and is running towards him. An average man in ratty clothes with stringy hair, a long beard, and an expression of just absolute rage. The selector switch and manual safety of the AC-556 are in two different locations, so Gary has not yet fired this weapon, and although he's taken off the safety, he doesn't know whether the switch is set for semi, 3-burst, or full auto. He yells, "Stop or I'll shoot!" and he levels the rifle and pulls the trigger for a warning shot. Now, the weapon is set on full automatic. Everything goes into deep slow motion, and Gary is aware that the Ruger spits a burst of 9 shots before he can get his finger back off the trigger. But those 9 shots had no effect whatsoever. The attacker just keeps running at him, perhaps 10 yards away and closing fast, reaching for knives on his belt in each hand. And the assailant screams, "Fuck you, motherfucker. Fuck your high-powered rifle. I'm gonna kill you, motherfuckers." At this point, Gary has run out of time. He lowers the Ruger, levels it straight at the guy, points it at the attacker, and pulls the trigger one more time. Now, Gary actually stated that in that surreal moment, time slowed, and he could actually see the spent shell casings arching lazily out of the mechanism. That's exactly the words he used to describe it. He stops the burst to where that 6 rounds have been fired, and the man just drops in front of him on the ground. Now, Gary moves quickly. He retreats back, putting a big brick planter between him and the rushing pickup as cover. The truck stops, and the driver, the larger of the two bearded men, shrieks, "Fuck you, you killed one of the brothers. You killed him, you shot him, motherfucker." So Gary's weapon is level and ready, but at this time, instead of waving the revolver, the man looks as if he's trying to hide in the cab of the truck. And Gary could see now that there is a third person in the truck, one who always stayed in the cab, and it was a woman from what he could see. And then, at that point, the police were there. He starts yelling, "They've got guns." He just starts shouting at the officers that hop out of the patrol cars. He sets his rifle down and steps back as the officers swarm the pickup truck, taking the surviving man and woman into custody. In a moment, the cop is standing with Gary, and Gary states, "I did it. I did it." The cop answers, Did what? What did you do?" And he says, "I shot the man." The officer picks up the AC-556, and Gary warns, "It's loaded. Do you want me to unload it for you?" The cop just says, "No, I'll do it. Why don't you just sit down over there?" Now, as Gary sits on the curb, for a moment it seems as if the whole nightmare is over, but unfortunately, with all litigation, it has just begun. Now, the man that Gary had shot, a man by the name of Billy, aka Too Loose Hamilton, was pronounced dead on scene. He had been hit by all 6 rounds of Winchester 55 grain full metal jacketed rounds. One bullet had struck the lateral midline in the instant that he turned away from the gunfire, and that took out a big chunk of his spine as it skidded across his back from side to side. This would be interpreted later by a prosecutor as having been quote-unquote shot in the back. The other man in the truck, who went by the name of Papa Zoot, had gotten his weapons out of his hands by the time police arrived. In the front of the Chevy pickup truck that had chased Fadden for more than 20 miles, police found a .22 auto pistol and a 4-inch Smith & Wesson L-frame .357 Magnum. The revolver had 3 live and 3 empty shell cartridges in the cylinder, and there's more fired brass all over the floor of the truck. There was a plastic bag with live ammo that was open on the seat as well. And although Fadden heard no shots and no bullets had struck his truck, he was convinced then and now that they were shooting at him during the chase. Hamilton's 2 knives, a folding hunting knife, and a nondescript fixed blade were found on his corpse. Gary Fadden was arrested that night and charged with first-degree murder. His family raised the $60,000 bail, and he hired DC attorney Jerry Traynor to defend him. Traynor, at Gary's request, retained John Farnham, one of the top handgun instructors in the world, as an expert witness. Now, today, Gary remembers that 2 prosecutors wouldn't even touch it until a third looked at it. It was all political because of the automatic weapon that was used. The week-long trial began in October of 1984. By that time, word had reached Gary that Papa Zoot had brought a .30-06 rifle and sworn a quote-unquote blood oath to kill him. And on the stand, Papa Zoot and the woman had testified that Gary had just tried to run their brother's bike off the road, and that they had just followed the 22 miles to get his license plate tag. That was it. Just get the license plate. Now, Gary's defense lawyer tore them apart in cross-examination. An undercover detective even broke his cover to testify that the deceased and Papa Zoot had quote-unquote put a bomb in my car. They like to rough up people. The prosecutor made such a show of waving the machine gun around that the judge made a point of instructing the jury that the weapon had nothing whatsoever to do with whether or not the shooting was in self-defense. The jury learned that Gary had purchased the AC-556 personally, and that it was perfectly legal to possess the weapon. By the start of the trial, the charge had been dropped to second-degree murder, and as the trial collapsed around the prosecutor's ears, he offered to plead to manslaughter, which Gary flatly rejected. At the end, when it was announced announced that the jury had found Gary Fadden not guilty on all counts, Fadden recalls that the same prosecutor snapped, in open court, in front of Gary's mother, "You've let a murderer loose." H&K protected me, states Gary. They picked up the tab for about half my legal bills, and they got all the publicity for it, up until a few years later. Florian Delton, at the time the CEO of H&K, told me that after an argument with the vice president that one or the other of us was probably going to have to go, and the vice president wasn't going anywhere. I accepted a job offer from Beretta USA and then resigned from H&K. Delton stuck me with the remaining bill, which I paid off at a 10% interest. The bill had amounted to more than about $45,000, so Gary was 34 years old before he had paid everything back. Dr. Delton no longer works for Heckler & Koch. Much later after the incident, the AC-556 was returned to him by the courts, and Gary actually ended up giving that gun to a close personal friend and world-renowned knife maker Al Marr, another man who appreciated a fine weapon of any kind. Al Marr had stood by Gary during the trial and afterwards, even when other friends had snubbed him. Now, on its stock was a brass plate that was engraved, "To Al Marr, because you understand." And Gary says that for 20 years now, he's cherished every moment that he's gotten up because he earned every moment of his life. He fought for it. After Al Marr's death, Gary Fadden scrapped the money he had to buy his knife business from him, and he is now currently the CEO of Al Marr Knives to this day. One good man carrying on the work of another, it seems pretty fitting. So there you have it, the Gary Fadden incident. Now, I'm not going to go into lessons learned from the incident itself, because you can make any inferences you like from the facts as if they were presented here. And anything else is pretty much subjective to your personal views on gun control, self-defense, politics, ethics, etc. But I would love to hear those thoughts on the incident in the comments below. Would you have kept driving? Would you have stopped and tried to talk it out? Or would you follow Gary's route and use what you had to defend yourself? Just let me know in the comments down below, and also let me know what you think of the video and what series and topics we should do next. Thanks for watching, and make sure to check out our other social media accounts linked down below, and I'll see you next time in the Lore Lounge.